Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We're going to take a few moments to let people log in, and then we'll do a quick intro, but just wanted you all to know we're going to wait a few moments to let everyone log in. We'll just wait another minute to give people a chance to log in. All right, we'll get started and people can join us as they're able to log in. Welcome to the 7th Annual Maplewood Ideas Festival. My name is Emily Witkowski and I'm the Teen Librarian at the Maplewood Memorial Library. Thank you for joining us for an evening with the authors of the Toni Morrison Book Club. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and we will field questions after the discussion. Thank you to the Friends of the Maplewood Library, the Maplewood Library Foundation, the New Jersey Council for the Arts, the Women's Club of Maplewood, and Words Bookstore for sponsoring our festival, and to the creative and talented staff at the Maplewood Library for putting this festival together. We should be hearing about our grant application for the New Jersey Library Construction Bond any day now, and we look forward to celebrating future festivals in our new Maplewood Library. Back in September of 2019, Library Director Sarah Lesser came up to my desk and asked me, "Didn't you go to TCNJ?" I said yes. And she then asked me, "Weren't you an English major?" I replied yes again, wondering where this was going, when she handed me a copy of the most recent issue of Publishers Weekly, a publication focused on the book industry and essential reading for librarians. It was turned to a page with a glowing review for the Toni Morrison Book Club, a group memoir of 4 professors from the College of New Jersey rereading Toni Morrison. I was immediately taken back to my freshman year at TCNJ when I walked into my multicultural literature class taught by Dr. Judah Bennett, one of the authors you are about to meet, who greeted us by saying, "You should all drop out, you're not ready for college and you don't know why you're here," or something to that effect. I'm not sure if Dr. Bennett remembers this, or maybe he gives a speech to every class, but it startled me. And while I don't think his intention was to make us all drop out, although who knows, maybe it was, it forced me to think about not only what I was doing, but why I was doing it. It was a lesson that has stuck with me ever since, and something that struck me as I read this amazing book back in the beginning of our stay-at-home order in March. Not only that we should read Toni Morrison, but why we read Toni Morrison and why we read in general. With that, let me introduce you to our authors. Judah Bennett is the author of Toni Morrison and the Queer Pleasure of Ghosts, essays Unzipped, The Passing Figure, and numerous articles on race and sexuality. He's a professor of English at the College of New Jersey, and my favorite fun fact, he lived in 3 hippie communes in the 70s and 80s before becoming a professor. Winifred Braun-Glaude is the author of Higglers in Kingston, Women's Informal Work in Jamaica, editor of Doing Diversity in Higher Education, Faculty Leaders Share Challenges and Strategies, and author of numerous articles on race, gender, and sexuality in the Anglophone Caribbean. She is a professor in the Departments of African American Studies and Sociology and Anthropology at the College of New Jersey. Cassandra Jackson is the author of Barriers Between Us, Interracial Sex in 19th Century American Literature, and Violence, Visual Culture, and the Black Male Body. She's a professor of English at the College of New Jersey, and she has published her public commentary on race and American culture at the Huffington Post and the Washington Post. And Piper Kendricks-Williams is the co-editor with Brian Norman of Representing Segregation, Toward an Aesthetics of Living Jim Crow. She's an associate professor in English and African American Studies at the College of New Jersey. I'm now going to pass it off to our guests, the authors of the Toni Morrison Book Club.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm going to start with a short introduction. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us. We love to be a part of this Ideas Festival, and we want to thank Emily especially. We've enjoyed every opportunity we've had to read from and talk about our book. And we started this book in 2016, right around the last presidential election. And it's so interesting that 4 years later, so many of the themes, experiences, and insights in the book are still relevant today, including how to parent as a Black mother, the police murdering of unarmed Black people, defending ourselves against those who would judge us, render us invisible, and harm us, and what it means to be white and do the work of anti-racism. We each wrote 2 chapters discussing 2 out of the 4 Toni Morrison novels we chose: The Bluest Eye, A Mercy, Song of Solomon, and Beloved. Each of our sections are preceded by a secrets chapter that provides some kind of insight into our writing process. So the secrets were written together, but no first draft of the secrets was written by ourselves, because the stories were really coaxed out of us as we planned, thought about, met, shared meals, in one case experiencing the horrific news of Philando Castile's murder. Cassandra, our book's extrovert, knew all of us the best, and so knew things about us that she wasn't sure that we all knew about ourselves. We had to be present with each other. We had to be vulnerable. We finally shared our stories. And after some feedback from one of the publishers we first submitted to that we didn't actually go with, they wanted us to find a way to talk about the writing process, and we really felt the secrets were the way. In some ways, our friendship grew tremendously during this process, and some of our meetings really felt like group therapy. We became better friends. We shared our stories with vulnerability, fear, joy, and even at times a sense of wonder, reflecting on how we as individuals got to where we were and how we as a group of writers came together for this book. So to get the conversation started tonight, we will each read a short excerpt from another person's secret, and Winnie will start by reading from Cassandra's secret. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to just talk with you all and share this wonderful project. Wonderful for me in so many ways, not only in terms of the writing, but just how the sense of community that we were able to build throughout the process. And so I'm looking forward to talking more about that. So yes, I'm going to share a short excerpt from Cassandra's secrets. Cassandra's secret is that she did not want to write this book. She got tricked, bamboozled, and hoodwinked into it. It wasn't that she felt any less inspired by Morrison than the rest of us. Sula was the first book about Black people that she had ever read. She was 18 years old, trying hard to figure out why she could see herself in a book that she only half understood. But she recognized herself on the page, an artist with no art form, dangerous. She had no idea who Toni Morrison was. She wasn't even sure if she was a man or a woman. But Cassandra knew she better take the hint, get an art form. She started writing, at first weak imitations of Morrison, and eventually something of her own emerged. Maybe this was why she avoided writing about Morrison like the plague. I mean, how do you write about someone whose shadow no living writer can ever escape? And on top of that, how do you write about someone whom so many have already written about? Cassandra was worried that her voice in a conversation about Morrison really didn't matter. So, when Judah proposed a group project inspired by Morrison's work over lunch, Cassandra bit into her tomato and mozzarella sandwich and said to herself, hell nah. To Judah, she made a list of problems with the project. Collaboration means more work and not less. More writing and not less. More struggles, splintering, and conflict, and certainly not less. Who ever heard of a book written from start to end by 4 people? And what about all of Morrison's possessive fans? You know, the ones who write odes and letters and search for virgins to sacrifice to her. What if they come for us? Judah, the forever optimist, kept chirping about how easily it could be done. No book is easy, Cassandra said. Even Morrison said it takes her 3 years to write one. Cassandra should have just said no, or at least told the truth that she was scared of this project. But she's not good at naked vulnerability. So instead, she said the kindest, or perhaps the most devious thing she could think of to get out of it. I'll do it if Winnie says yes. Now, Judah knew exactly what she was up to. They both knew that Papa would say yes because Papa says yes to whiny students and lazy colleagues and anyone short of a hitchhiker with a butcher knife. Winnie, on the other hand, is always discerning and a little suspicious. She would be a much harder sell. Cassandra was confident that Winnie would act as the hitman, killing the project before it even got started, leaving Cassandra without blame. And I'll stop there.
Just listening to you read that, Winnie, it really makes me sound bad, huh? Hey everyone, I'm glad so many of you are here tonight. I'm gonna read from Judah's Secret. Judah has almost no secrets. We know that he once wore something called community clothes, a funky collection of shirts, pants, skirts, and dresses free to anyone living on the commune. We know that he moved around a lot, taking up residence in an abandoned teepee, an empty yurt, and even a VW bus for a while. Since we have known him, he has had a similar restless nature, moving every 2 years, flipping houses, and not for profit, but because of an unexplained need for change. We also know he is kind of spooky, believing in all manner of spirits, ghosts, and anything else that floats. We know that it took 3 tries, 3 egg donors, and 1 surrogate for him and his partner to have 1 precious child. And this too, he credits to spirits that follow him. We find all of this charming. Less so the information that his brother would just as soon call us niggers as by our names. Just as disturbing are the accounts of family discussions after the murder of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. His is a military family, a law enforcement family, a racist family. We have listened to his accounts of family discussions and felt for his uncomfortable place as an outsider in his own family. If there is a secret behind Judah's chapters, it is rooted in his curious connection to Black people and culture. In one of our meetings, he admitted that the police murder of Alton Sterling, a Black man in Louisiana, had consumed him, and that without meaning to, he had watched the video of Sterling being killed again and again. Sitting at Judah's dinner table, we were too caught up in the pain we experienced in watching that video to ask the question that lay hidden in the back of our minds. You felt it too? One should only need to recognize abuse and the humanity of its victims to feel hurt and outraged. And so our question should have been moot. But we live in a world filled with people who could not see Sterling's humanity, and Judah's family made up just a few of those people. So the second question, the one we seem to find 1,000 ways to ask without asking, is where the hell did Judah come from? How does one come from a family like his and become someone who teaches the work of Toni Morrison to imprisoned women in a maximum security prison? We never got a clear answer to this question, partly because while Judah is comfortable talking about his whiteness, he freaks out, and rightly so, at any question that situates him as better than most white folks. He has no desire to be Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds, or Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side, or Hilary Swank in Freedom Writers. He has no purple cape with which to fly around saving Black people from racism or white people from being racist. So when we pushed him to write about the obvious elephant in the room, whiteness, Morrison's white characters, and even white guilt, he had what can only be described as a conniption.
Okay, I get to read from Winnie's Secret, thank goodness before mine, because mine always makes me feel a little bit exposed. There's a gun in Winnie's story. It was Chekhov who said that you should never put a loaded gun on stage if it's not going to be fired. Make no promises you can't keep. But Winnie's life is not a play, and you will have to decide if the gun has earned its keep in her story. Anyway, the gun is not the real secret of Winnie's story. The secret is the slow burn that lies beneath Winnie's measured exterior. Winnie does not feel permission to express anger, shout, or rail against the world, risk losing control. However, we have seen signs of her rage, faint smoke billowing from the top of her head, but it always disappears into the ether, enveloped by her quiet calm. So we keep wondering, what will happen if just once that rage bubbles over her perfect edges? Shopping for a gun, therefore, seems to be an apt symbol of the controlled woman pushed to the edge of exploding. Winnie is the kind of elegant woman who, if she were to really let go, everyone would freeze, like children in trouble. Her voice is honey, and if she were to say, "Be careful, I have a gun," it would sound like an invitation more than a threat. And she has a way of holding herself, tilting and gesturing upward as if she had once been a professional dancer, making it almost impossible for us to imagine her holding a gun with more than 2 delicate fingers. When we first heard the story about the gun, it was an aside, something that just popped up when we were discussing the latest news story about yet another unarmed Black man shot by cops. Judah had already served us baked salmon on a bed of greens, and we were not ready to work. But what was work and what was just aimless conversation in those dangerous times? We were writing about Morrison and our lives as they related to current events, and everything had just started blurring, and into this blur was the mention of Winnie's gun.
Hello, everybody. Piper already alluded to the fact that when I read her chapter, it puts her through something, and we've already read her chapter many times, and it still has that effect. And so does it have an effect when I hear my secret unveiled, perhaps more now than ever, because of what's going on in my life. And I guess before I read, I want to say we're trained to have distance. We're academics, we're scholars. We're trained to have distance from our object of study. And so this project really did put us through a lot. It is the opposite end of what we usually write. We usually write things that are about books and we have distance from them. So with Piper in mind, it's painful to read this, but this is what we did. When Cassandra first read Piper's draft about her childhood, absent of any mention of white boys, she could not even make sense of Piper's earliest memory of being called the N-word. How can you possibly pinpoint a first time, Cassandra asked. Silence, furrowed eyebrows. I mean, how can you possibly remember a first time, Cassandra persisted. It made no sense to her because in the Alabama of her childhood, that hateful word was so commonplace, she couldn't have separated any single moment from the many others. Well, come on, Cassandra said. Tell us what happened in high school. That's more interesting than some white kid on the playground trying to feel big by calling you names. We had, in fact, already workshopped Piper's story of her early childhood, but this second draft still had not yet included anything about the way she had been treated. You can't write a whole explanation of what it's like to grow up the only Black kid in your school, and then stop before the problems really started. You've got to talk about that white boy, Cassandra insisted. You know it's true. Piper looked away and hummed. I can't put that in my chapter because, she stopped, because my mom's going to read this book. Piper's mother, in fact, had already read an early draft, a draft without the leering and invasive white boys. Not pulling back, Cassandra started again. Piper, really? You're a 40-something grown-up woman with a husband, 3 kids, and you're the best mother in the world. You've got to write about those boys. Slow down, Winnie said. Boys, as in plural? Uh-huh, Cassandra nodded. There it is. Then Piper let it all out, telling us about the one guy Cassandra had already heard about, a second who leered at her like he was entitled to her, and a third who never got named, and they seemed to pop up like zombie placards in a cheap haunted house. But instead of zombies, they were real boys and men still walking the earth. With complete innocence, Judah threw up his hands and said, there are just too many white guys. What he meant was that he could not keep them all straight in his head, but the idea of there being too many white guys seemed ambiguous, and so that phrase dogged Piper for the rest of our project. Yes, too many white guys indeed, Cassandra cackled. That's got to be the title of your chapter. But having a title didn't make it any easier to write, and it was one of the hardest written chapters in the collection, with each of us sending Piper on different journeys into early and painful memories. Who takes over?
Well, I guess we're ready for questions.
So I have a couple of questions that I just wanted to start with, and then we can also field attendee questions. But for those in attendance that haven't read the book, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more, and you kind of alluded to this in your first reading, but how did this project come to be and why Toni Morrison?
Judah.
Okay, I will admit that I had the first idea, and that's because I am a Toni Morrison scholar. I had heard my colleagues talking about their teaching of Toni Morrison for years. I had read several books that were not exactly the same. They were usually by one author where they use Proust or somebody else to talk about the world right now. And so it's nothing to come up with an idea. And so I will take credit for coming up with the idea, but really, I guess I would like to put it back to the 3 others because they sustained the project. Anybody can say, oh, in fact, people are doing that every day. They're saying, I got an idea for a great book. That's the easy part. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the project certainly, I mean, thanks to Judah for putting the idea out, you know, for us to write together and to write together about Morrison. We started really sort of just thinking out loud together about this idea, this wonderful idea. And then the election happened and President Trump was elected. And that was a period for all of us, and I'm sure we're not alone, where, you know, everything just seemed so upside down. And as faculty, a lot of students came to us to try to help them make sense of the moment. But we couldn't help them because we were trying to figure it out ourselves. We knew something has shifted in this nation, and that shift has made us all more vulnerable. And we needed to sort of process that, right? Spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. And so after the election happened, we got back together to sort of just be in each other's spaces and to talk, and we used that to talk about the project, but it evolved into something more than just us writing, about this awesome scholar. It evolved into a sense of community as we try to navigate these choppy waters that we know were ahead of us. And the beauty of it all was that we discovered, I think we sort of sensed it before, but at least for me, as a casual reader of Morrison, I did not realize how important her work would be, how important her voice would be for me and for us, if I can speak for my friends, how important her voice would be in helping us make sense of this moment. And so I'll sort of share, let the others sort of add their take.
I want to highlight that word that you used, though, Winnie, when you said friends. You said my friends. And I feel like this did not come together like a scholarly project would, where there's somebody who you share an interest with and you think, oh, we'll write a project together, we'll do something together. We were all friends to begin with. And so Winnie does a good job, I feel like, in terms of setting the scene, because there really was we were watching the rise of white supremacy in our country, and we were watching it happening together. And I feel like we deeply needed each other at this time. Even I, who resisted the book, I feel like we really did need each other in this moment. And it did end up functioning it was so much more than a book. It really became, something like a book club. And it's interesting because one of our earlier titles was something like, it was about, the secret life of race or something like that. But we were really thinking about the fact that there were all of these things that, that we didn't know about each other, that we learned about each other in that moment, in part because I think we deeply needed that intimacy as a source of support in that moment. And I will be forever grateful to have done that, with the three of you.
I guess I would just like to speak to the process. We didn't know what we were writing. And we had so many meetings when it's like, what is this genre? And our drafts went through so many manifestations, much more scholarly to start. And we submitted it to a press and were rejected, and we got very dejected, and it's thanks again to Judah for helping us figure out a way to reshape it. And Wisconsin was so great to work with, and our feedback from them helped us develop a longer intro and the secrets chapters. But I just flashed on something when Cassandra said we needed it, and we are just so close to the next election. And we've been talking a little bit about what's our next project, and do we want to write a next project? And now I'm like, oh my God, we have to write another book because November 2nd is coming, and I'm going to need you all again to hopefully weather the effects, whichever way the election goes. It seems like no matter what happens, it's going to be a traumatic moment for the country. So Cassandra, another book?
I want to echo what Piper said, because I think a lot of viewers might really want to romanticize the idea, but the idea was just like a glimmer. And I think what Piper is giving you a glimpse of is there were times when she was at a computer in a a classroom and saying, what about this? And then at one point it was a Google Doc, and somebody's typing and we're like, ooh, that looks good. And then and then there's too many sentences spreading out on a shared Google Doc. And so I don't think there's ever been a book that has had so many hands in it. So what was the start? Who cares what the start was? The middle is the interesting part.
I was just going to ask, in the intro, you say something about this book was something conceived, co-written, and collaboratively created from top to bottom. And I think that speaks to what you guys are all saying, but can you tell us more about that actual process? Like, what was the writing like for four people writing together?
Yeah, I mean, Judah is not exaggerating when he said that, simply there's a Google Doc and we all put our hands on it. I mean, I tell this story all the time. One time I was in the library in Princeton, in the basement of the library in Princeton, doing research, and Judah is in his kitchen at home, and he calls me, and I'm like, I'm in the library, what do you want? And he's like, I'm having a hard time with this sentence. I mean, literally a sentence. And I pull up the Google Doc, and I'm looking at it from the library, and he's looking at it from his kitchen. And, I will write a couple of words and say, okay, is this what you're trying to say? And he says, no, that's really not. And so he'll erase it, and then he writes something else and say, does that make sense? And I'm like, nah, that doesn't really. And so literally we both are working together, writing together on one sentence. I mean, at that level of detail, I mean, we have touched, each of us have touched every part of this book from the beginning to the end. And, Judah had said something earlier that, and Piper also, that this book has gone through so many different drafts. We're trained, as scholars. And so our go-to move is always the academic, we use the academic writing and the social distance and all that kind of stuff. But over time, it evolved into this new genre. And yeah, we were rejected by various publishers because they did not know what this was. And neither did we at the time, and so thanks to Judah's optimism, he and we all just come to realize, oh, or it might have been a reader who described it as a group memoir. I don't even know where that term group memoir came from, but it was something that we just worked together, and it evolved into what I think is something beautiful.
I just want to say too, I really enjoyed this process in terms of like the collaborative writing, but like, do not be fooled. Judah was ruthless. Like, the rest of us are using Google Docs. You know how you click on suggesting? Judah would be in there just ripping stuff up. No suggestions. Like, he had no idea how to get back to the original document. So like, at one point, I remember like, Piper, you had written like maybe 30 pages on something, and it came back and it was like 8 pages long. And you were like, what happened? And I was like, Judah happened. So like, do not be fooled. Like, it really was. But now when I look at the manuscript now, I don't always know who wrote what. And I always think I know, and then I'll say, oh, Judah, we'll do a reading together, and I'll say, oh, Judah, this is you. And he's like, no, that was you. Yeah. And I actually argued with him about this recently, and I went back to the document, and he was right. It was me, but I thought he had written that particular line.
I have to say, Cassandra especially often gives me credit for writing things because she's so impressed that I'm willing to cut things. That's what I'm really good at. I can cut, trim, chop like nobody's business. And I think I know what she was talking about. She said, well, you wrote about the zombie placards. I'm like, what's a zombie and what's a placard? I did not write that.
Someone asked a great question here. You're talking about a Google Doc. How different would this be without the use of technology? Could it have even been possible to write this without something like Google Docs?
No, and I was just going to say, we're completely indebted to Google on this one. Like, no, if we hadn't been able to have collaborative documents, it allowed us to be in each other's heads. in a given moment. And I can't imagine another way to have done this. As someone who I have a clear memory of a world without collaborative documents, and I can't see it. Judah, can you? Mm-mm. Yeah.
That's amazing. Someone asks here, it sounds like such an amazing, rich process you all went through together. Did you find it healing? Did you ever have to pause due to the feelings that arose throughout your work?
I think I definitely did. My experience in high school was hard, and going back to think about it, reading it with my mother, having my mother-in-law read it and talk to me about it, really let me, I just read this memoir, and at the end of it, he said, it's Life on the Color Line by Gregory Howard Williams. And he says, sometimes I think about the bewildered boy and I wish he knew who I became. And I think for me, it was just like that lonely Black girl. I wish I could have told her, you're going to go to Spelman. I told her you're going to have these amazing professors who are going to inspire you to become a professor, and you're going to be able to be in a classroom and, meet people who like you went to high school with, who never had to think one bit about race ever, and like change them and transform them. And so I always love to romanticize my own history. So I skip past my high school and I go back to my ancestors. And, so this process where I had to like get closer, really helped me figure out that, all of everything that happened to you is part of your story that makes up who you are and who you become.
I just want to piggyback on Piper. So beautifully said, Piper. For me, it was also healing because my friends helped me to open up. I tend not to share anything private. I'm very private. I'm like a vault, and to write my stories, to write my chapters, I had to open up, and I had to feel safe, to allow myself to. I had to be comfortable with my vulnerability, and just open up. And so thanks to my friends, they've given me that space, judgment free, lovingly, and that has healed me in ways that I would not have even thought that this would have brought for me. So for me, this was a gift. This process was a gift that I'll always remember.
I do feel like there were lots of pauses that we had to take, particularly in some of our conversations when we were talking about painful memories. But as we're talking about it now, I'm realizing too, like just in this moment, because it sounds like we're actually having a conversation about shame. And sort of the things that we are carrying that we were able to put down when we were at a table together, and say, I'm not to blame for this. I don't have to take, sort of responsibility for, the whole world in this way that we tend to do. But yeah, I also, I don't know, I think one of the pauses for me was I didn't know what the three of you knew about each other necessarily. So I like to say that my one talent is like, I'm very nosy. Ask a lot of questions. And I wasn't sure, because the three of you identify as introverted, I was never sure what you knew about each other. And so I was constantly like, go ahead and tell them that thing, the thing, without wanting to tell somebody else's story, for me. But yeah, like it was really interesting sort of navigating that. because as the nosy person, I did tend to know a little bit more maybe about people sometimes.
I think too, it's been really cool to have all these events and the stories we tell. And, you know, I feel like we're even getting to know, we're keeping up the project. It's been, like when I said in my introduction, like we've enjoyed every single moment that we've been able to like read together and talk about the book. And even all these conversations remind me of how rich the group of us are when we're gathering, we're thinking, and I don't know, it's just it is still a group thing that I think binds us. And it's so great that the book is inspiring people to, you know, invite us to have these conversations. And I feel like the conversations really do give us, it makes the book keep like living as a real living thing with us.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here, and I had this question as I was reading it. All of you teach Morrison, I believe. I know I've only had the pleasure of having Judah, but I know that Morrison's used in a lot of your syllabi. Has doing this project changed how you teach Morrison or how you work with students about Morrison's work? And if so, how?
I am slated to teach not a whole course in Morrison, which I've done before, but 2 or 3 novels next semester. But I have taken a break from teaching her because I did write a monograph on her before this book and then this book. But I have to say, after reading Cassandra's chapter on Beloved, I'll never teach it the same way again. I mean, I'll never even look at it the same way again. And so even though I can't work it into my class next semester, I'm teaching other novels. I do really look forward to teaching it again because I feel like now I've got a new tool to help me teach it.
So I'm a sociologist by training, so I don't really work with a lot of literature. But after this experience, I could definitely see how I can use her work to think about race and racial structures. You know, one of the things that I really liked about A Mercy, well, both books really, Song of Solomon as well, but, you know, Mercy gets us to think about the US racial context prior to, you know, in the 1600s, the late 1600s, before racism and white supremacy really became embedded in the US national landscape. And I think that, you know, I talk about race as a social construction in my sociology classes, but I think her work could really help students get at that history, get at that understanding in a different way, you know? And so I'm definitely considering, and I'm not teaching this year, but I'm definitely considering using more fiction, especially Morrison's work, to just get students to think about these complex sociological issues from a different kinds of disciplines. So that's how she has impacted me.
So I teach Beloved a lot. And I think in the future, I might replace it with A Mercy, which is a book that I had never considered teaching before this. And quite frankly, you know, when we said that we chose 4 books, right? And when we, you know, Judah made the initial argument for, he was like, we have to do A Mercy. People don't talk about this book enough. And I thought, you know, maybe there's a reason they don't talk about it as much at the time. I was like, man, why are we going where nobody else wants to go? But I would, after reading Piper's chapter on it, I would absolutely teach it now. I would absolutely teach it. And I don't know why, but I didn't realize, because of the period, as Winnie just pointed out, because of the period that the book is in, it really speaks to a lot of my work. And I really hadn't considered it before. And it's also so readable, so approachable, such an enjoyable book. And quite frankly, that's just not a word people use with Morrison a lot, enjoyable. It is definitely, really striking how much she's meeting the reader wherever they are with that particular book. And I thought, that makes it the one to teach. And I hadn't really considered that before. I was so caught up with the idea of Beloved, which is a beautiful book, but an incredibly sophisticated book, that sometimes it might not be the best first book of Morrison's to read. Whereas A Mercy, in the way that The Bluest Eye can function as an entree to her work. If that makes sense.
Definitely. We have some great questions here. Are there any ways that this project would influence your academic writing going forward? Did your academic writing influence this more personal endeavor?
Well, I think so. I wanted to write about the Song of Solomon, but I was sort of outvoted, but it still remains the book that speaks the most to me. And I am working on a project in Afrofuturism, and I was thinking this new Lovecraft Country show, which I haven't been brave enough to watch yet, so I only think about it in the way that it's been described. But in the broad ways it's been described about the reverse migration, like you're going from north to south, and you're searching for family, seems so much like the story that goes through Song of Solomon. Like Milkman has to go from north to south, and he has to find his family, and he encounters ghosts in the house, and there's fantastical things. And I do think that Morrison, being so unapologetically Black and saying that her audience is, she doesn't have to write about white people, and she doesn't have to worry about what white people think of her books. She's so centered in Blackness. And I think that is so Afrofuturistic to say, like, the past, Beloved, the past, A Mercy, the present, Song of Solomon, Bluest Eye, the future, to imagine how all of these things can make it so that we can live in the future. So I'm definitely thinking in my, it's one of the chapters of the book I want to write. It's going to be Song of Solomon and Lovecraft Country, because I'm trying to pair different kind of art forms together. But I definitely think that, and I think Morrison can be beautiful. Cassandra and I just did this Cornell reading of The Bluest Eye, and I just had it on all day. And some of those words just stopped me in my tracks. And I love Morrison with, she doesn't write in jargon, but she puts together simple words to make such complex human emotional ideas that you're like, how come I can't understand that even though I know what every word means?
So I'm really thinking about this. I feel like I came to the project from a little bit of a different place, in that I was already, doing some personal writing, already working on a memoir, and also just having in many ways really lost faith in the idea of literary criticism, in part because I've grown to have real questions about what it means to write an article that 10 people will read, and one of them's your mother. And also just in terms of ways in which I saw the field as kind of closing itself off from a lot of people, including your mother, you know what I mean? Like in ways, and I mean this in terms of the kind of jargon that was being used in so much literary criticism. I mean this in the idea that so much of it was being written for other people with PhDs. And, I'm the only person in my family with a PhD. And I found myself questioning, like, who am I talking to? When I'm doing this, who is this exercise for? And so I started doing like more public intellectual work, because I was interested in, this idea, right, that the ideas that we work with in literary criticism, particularly those of us who work on issues around race, need to be readable and approachable by people who are having the very experiences that we're writing about. And so, when I'm thinking about how academic writing affected this for me, it didn't for me specifically, but I do remember what I remember very much was Winnie smiling because she knows what I'm going to say. It was like we kept saying to Winnie, "What does that mean? Would your mother understand that?" Like there was a lot of, because the truth is, like, for me, those are the words that academics hide behind. Right. And I actually do believe that oftentimes there is a lot of pain and hurt behind that kind of academic performance. And I wanted, frankly, that's how I let myself get sucked into this. But because it was, Judah kept describing like, no, this is not an academic book. This is not an academic book. And that was really important to me, to be writing a book where I could bring, the children that I grew up with into conversation with Morrison, and to think about those lives as connected. Whereas I do feel like Morrison, for some time, became a writer that seemed very intimidating because it was mostly scholars writing about her, and I don't feel like it should be that way. I don't think Morrison ever sat down and thought, yeah, I'm going to write for scholars so they'll write about me, so yeah, so it was very much part of our process, thinking about what is academic writing and how this book is not that. But of course, you're still building on all those ideas, that you learn as a scholar. The question is, can you translate those ideas so that they make sense, to people who are not scholars? Because to me, if they don't, right, then you just wasted a lot of time talking to yourself.
There's a great question here. Memoirs are collections stored in our souls. How do you tend your emotional garden after bearing your souls in this group memoir?
I'm looking at you, Winnie.
Winnie's the gardener among us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that that we do is that we still try to have lunch and spend time with each other and continue to nurture each other, because the challenges remain, right? We're still dealing with so much hate in our society, so much division in our society, and we still feel vulnerable. We still feel unsafe. And so the writing process, the book itself sort of became a starting point, but that friendship, that connection, that community that we built as a result of this book is still there, and we continue to tend to it. And I think that is sort of how I, at least, can restore, or to sort of, just keep my soul and my sanity intact.
Yeah, early in the summer, we met on the deck at Judah's house, and he said, I'm just going to put a little something together. And then out comes this delicious salmon, little tiny tender baby potatoes, tomatoes. And then Winnie stops by this Black-owned bakery and brings us ridiculous, delicious, sweet treats. And we sort of pretend we're working, and we were like planning, we were getting lots of requests for meetings, and we were doing it. But I just think that, like, sharing a meal, I mean, even in these challenges with COVID, like finding ways to still get together and be safe and be outside, it is the way that I think. And then I do think, because we are academics, like for me, it is in the work, it is in the teaching, it is in the just getting up every day and still trying to do what I do.
I don't know if I should stretch the metaphor too much, but when I was living on the commune, we were trying to plant our gardens in a way that we wouldn't have to use pesticides. So there was companion plants. So garlic often repelled pests that would get into your tomatoes or whatever. And so in terms of the metaphor of tending your garden, it's really interesting for me because I'm thinking about what it means to be a white man in a time where the white the terrorism performed by white males and the scenes that we're seeing in the news are constantly making me reflect on, okay, so what are you doing, Judah? Where are you at? And I have to say, you know, I'm human, and there are times in this book project where I felt like I was not my best self or made some missteps. And I'm very aware of that as much now as ever. So as a good gardener, I have to sort of think about, you know, that's not something to run away from. Yes, do I have shame? Do I have uncomfortable moments? Yes, absolutely. But just going deeper and you know, address that is my philosophy.
I tend to, this process, when he said it earlier, this is why I tend to think of it as having been somewhat therapeutic. It is as if both the writing, but also the conversations about the writing, it was so enriching in that way that to me, you know, there was no separation between this sort of bearing of the self, right, and the kind of rejuvenation that you experience in community, because we did it all together. So it didn't feel taxing. I didn't feel like I was losing something in that process, but I did feel like I was working through various kinds of emotions about what we were all experiencing at the time. And it did function as a kind of support group in that way. At a time when I feel like a lot of people were experiencing a lot of isolation. And so, yeah, like, yeah, to me, the process itself, you know, felt therapeutic. It felt enriching and rejuvenating. I never left one of our gatherings feeling depleted by it. You know, I always felt like I was thriving when I was with the three of you.
I want to squeak in one last question. This is a great one. With Election Day underway and the deeply ingrained problems of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, etc., how would page 1 of your next book project, Speaking It Into Existence, begin?
That question's from Michael Mitchell, our new colleague at TCNJ.
I had to ask it. You guys alluded to possibly a next project, so you need to share.
Go ahead, Judah.
Me? I thought you were going to say, go ahead, Cassandra. You're the one you have to rope in. I got her the first time. Now we need some really skilled hands at roping her in for a second project.
I mean, the question is, like, we're the Toni Morrison Book Club. Would we want to go back to other Toni Morrison books? Would we want to consider a different author? You know,
I don't think the author is as important as what we bring together, and so I have a feeling anybody would throw us an author and like, okay, we're going to go with it. Cassandra, what do you have to say?
I just want to point out to everyone that whenever this comes up, they try to get me on video and in front of an audience to commit. I just want to put that out there so you know what kind of people these are. And honestly, like, I have thought about it. So here's part of my thinking about this, and I'm going to say this part publicly. I feel like all of us have another memoir in us. And honestly, I kind of want to hear more of my friends' individual stories. So Judah's working on a memoir. Piper, I know you're doing a lot of personal writing. If there's somebody here who knows how to get Winnie to write a memoir, please step in and do it. Get the truth serum out. Because my manuscript for the memoir that I was working on is done. I would definitely like to get that placed with a publisher before I moved on with another group project, though. But I also don't. I mean, everybody here is working on a book, whether it's a memoir project or not, right now. And I wanna see those books come to life. I want to see those books because the truth is, this project that we did was so important to us that we did put other projects on hold to do it, because it was what we needed at the time. So, come early November, I might feel like we need another group book at the time. Let's see what happens.
Well, I want to thank you all so much. Your book is amazing. I cannot recommend it enough. Toni Morrison Book Club. It is available at our library, but it is also available at Words Bookstore, which is the local bookstore in Maplewood. So please purchase it, borrow it, read it. And thank you all so much for attending our program this evening. We have one more Ideas Festival program left on Monday, November 9th at 7 p.m. with Marta Tolato. She's a CHS graduate and Consumer Reports president and CEO. And she will be in conversation with David Brancaccio, host and senior editor of Public Radio's Marketplace Morning Report. We hope you'll be able to join us. Have a great evening, and thank you all again.
Thank you for having us. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you guys so much.